potato, I know it. That's what your cats do. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the first official night of Coffee with Mildred. I'm Maria Erickson, and
I'm Tracy Croteau.
we're both on the board of the Historical Society, and this month is our membership drive month. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, Tracy?
Yes, become a member in September.
Hey, I like it.
Did y'all get that? Did you get the member September?
Yes.
So yes, become a member in September. It is our the Historical Society's membership drive this month. And this is the best part of becoming a member in September. If you're a new member or if you've signed up for the auto pay, we've got prizes, a long list of businesses that have said you can have this prize if you become a member or again becoming that
Recurring.
the recurring auto pay. So your name will go into a drawing, and your name might be drawn for one of these great prizes. The one I'm thinking of off the top of my head is the Trail Center dinner for two.
That's a good one.
I know, yeah.
Hedstrom's Lumber, shavings, 5 bags of shavings, I believe, a pickup load of cutoffs for firewood, or one other thing, maybe a pickup load of wood chips or something. I don't remember, but I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, those are, I mean, it's some great prizes.
Yeah.
So I hope that you would consider becoming a member of the Cook County Historical Society, because we, of course, want the history of Cook County to be known throughout the county and even throughout the state. So even if you're not living in Cook County, you're still welcome to learn about the history of this North Shore area.
Yeah. So what we're doing tonight is, are you done? Okay. What we're doing tonight is we are with the Anderson family. Wayne Anderson has lived in Cook County his whole life. He is 89 years old, and he's met a few people. So we'll be chatting with them in just a bit. But I wanted to go over why we're calling this Coffee with Mildred. So years ago, and when I was growing up, there was always that person, the older gentleman sitting at the end of the counter, the end of the bar, or you'd go to someone's house and there was always a coffee break kind of thing. You'd have coffee and a little something to eat in the afternoon. And that's when the stories were shared. And we just don't have that as much anymore. And so I wanted to get some of these stories collected here so we could all see them and share in that. And you can feel free to ask questions. You can chat on here. You can chat on my Facebook page, and we can interact that way and ask extra questions if you want more information. So it's called Coffee with Mildred because Wayne's mother was Mildred, and I have fond memories just of the Andersons telling me stories about telling stories, sitting around Mildred's kitchen table, and how she would sit there and run her fingers through the crack in the table while they were having coffee and telling stories, and the little remarks she would make as stories were shared. I want to take a moment to talk about this month. I was supposed to, one of the people I was going to interview was Dwayne and Virginia Johnson and their family. And it was about a week after I got them to agree to the interview, which I've known Dwayne and Virginia for 20 years. And they finally just started talking to me really in the last year when I would sit down and have coffee with them, when we would run into each other. And the way that Dwayne would talk about, he and Virginia were married for just over 69 years, I believe it is, and how he would talk about her and the love that he had for her, for having found his best friend and someone who liked to do the same things as him, was just, it was beautiful to listen to. And they had some amazing adventures. They had, how many kids did they have? 6 kids. And they like packed those kids around everywhere up in Hovland, up in the woods. They even drove their snowmobiles, which their house is on Lake Superior, drove their snowmobiles with the kids over to Isle Royal to just have a picnic, go fishing. He talked about the dances that used to be at the Hovland Town Hall, and what a great time that was, and people getting together and just enjoying each other's company. And another story that I loved was he talked about Virginia. They both like to hunt and fish, and Virginia hadn't had an opportunity to get a big buck. And finally they saw a big buck, and she really wanted to get it. And they worked at it, and she finally got her big buck. Well, it also was, what is it? It's called rutting season. Yeah, the buck was in rut. But you have 6 kids to feed, you're going to eat the deer. And it was terrible. Every bite of it was bad, according to Dwayne. But you do what you got to do to feed your family. And so, unfortunately, Dwayne passed away before we could do the interview. And so I wanted to share some of those stories of Dwayne and Virginia, and it just shows why this is so important to talk to these different families in this area and get some of these stories and to get the history. Sometimes I'm going to do timelines. We did a test run with Wayne here a couple of weeks ago, and we started off with how his family came to be in Cook County, and we made it to somewhere in the elementary grades about after an hour. And so we'll pick up his timeline at another time, because tonight I want to do a theme, and that theme is characters. So different people in Cook County who are still with us or not with us, who they maybe have stories about and or learn something from. And yeah, so we're going to try that route, and feel free to, throw in some names of people that you want to hear a story about. Maybe they have one, maybe they don't. I'm calling it Stump the Storyteller. And we'll see what they come up with. Of course, as all interviews go, at about 6:59, we couldn't think of a single person's name, and all our minds went blank. So any help you can give us would be wonderful.
Well, I have one, but Maria, I have a coffee with Mildred kind of story. I just want to share it with you.
Okay.
Mine was coffee with Elwood. That was my grandpa. So when I was 3, I'd sit around the table with the adults having the coffee. Just, they were in a different part of the state, but very much the same as Cook County. Anyway, I would go around to dip my cookie in all their coffee, and I'd sip their coffee until one day my mom said, if you don't stop drinking coffee, you're going to get hair on your chest like your grandpa. And in those days, they wore the white tank tops, and he had a hairy chest, and it was sticking out all over. I've never drank coffee since. Anyway, that's a story.
That's a good
coffee
one.
with Mildred story.
I like it.
So maybe we'll hear some of that from the Andersons.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to, and I'm going to turn this around here. We have Kent Anderson, Wayne Anderson, and Philis Anderson there. And I don't know if I can get them all in all the time, but I'll make Kent do the moving.
I could move over a little bit.
All right. So we were talking about a few of the characters or old timers, and after our interview last time, we had some names there too. So the Eversons were quite the characters in town, as I recall, and hopefully I'll be able to get some of their interviews of those that are left. But do you want to talk about any of the Eversons to start off with?
Well, I went to the Everson family lived on Maple Hill here, and went to the Maple Hill school. And of course, I went to school with all the kids, so I knew all the kids, and it was a big family. Lloyd Everson and I were we're in first grade together, and we were the first grade on Maple Hill. We were 2 of us. and then later on another student moved in, but Walter Bett, but we were the original two, and then there were some younger ones and several older, and they were all pretty much the whole family was quite musical. The dad was a good fiddler, and their uncle was a good two of the uncles were good fiddlers, or fairly good fiddlers at least, and then the older children all, well, just about everybody in the family played instruments, so they'd, you know, and when my mother was young, she was a piano player, and so she and that older generation would play music together, and so when the older girls and Anna Speck is still with us, and she and her sister Gladys were in the 4-H, and my mother was a 4-H leader, and I don't know how they worked it out, but they went to the state fair and performed, and they did it as Swedish costume and did Swedish songs, and so my mother worked with them and showed them costumes and such, and so they, of course, never forgot it. You know, it was a big deal in those days for something like that. So, and I don't know if I know a lot of other stories about that particular family, but Oscar, they're one of the older boys, and Kent, he used to play guitar, and Kent would, when he was a little kid, he'd play with him on the fiddle, and they'd, you know, just for fun. So
Kent would go down after school and
in the evenings.
in the evenings and play with Oscar. I didn't know it. but if it's music,
things.
that's good.
but it was, you know, in those days, there wasn't a lot of entertainment, so homemade music and homemade fun was a good thing.
And they all could play by ear. Wayne's mother played by ear.
All of them played by
and
ear.
Kent and I played by ear.
If they heard a tune, they could copy it.
Yeah. And Wayne's mother she had perfect pitch, which means, and I maybe mentioned this last time we were interviewing, which means I would go in the kitchen, or she would go in the kitchen, and I would play some notes on the piano, and she'd tell me the notes. And you know, it's sort of a inborn thing, I think, and
it's
acquired
yeah.
too. I mean, you can with the oboe, I tend to hear the overtones, so I kind of know what notes I'm playing and whatnot. And Kent has pretty good perfect pitch too.
I'm hoping to get Anna Speck to sing Red Rooster for me.
Oh,
Because she
you better hurry.
Yeah, she always, I know that's a song that she would sing all the time.
Yeah.
Well, she and her sister used to, on this particular thing that they did for the 4-H, they did, you know, Elsa dem der Himmel, that's a Swedish song that a lot of people know. And I remember they did that.
That means greet the folks at home.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
when Wayne's mother was dying, I whispered that into her ear because I knew she would know what I was talking about.
How about one of the people that we were just commenting on was talking about characters was Mrs. Jackson of Jackson's Cafe, the old bus stop down there.
Yeah.
Do you remember her?
I remember her well.
Yeah, I do too.
And she was the deputy registrar, so she sold, and she was a stickler for, I mean, if you didn't have the exact right,
There's I's dotted in.
yeah, anything, it had to be just exactly right. But she did that for many years. And so, besides waitressing at the cafe, and then her husband was the cook, and sometimes he'd cook and bring food out himself. But anyhow, they were a character, and of course that was the bus depot, and so I guess it's my son Rolf's story, but I'll tell it anyhow. But he went there with my parents to wait for the bus. Somebody was coming in, and Mrs. Jackson was there, and they were sitting waiting, and somebody, there was a bar next door, and somebody came stumbling in and said, "Can I come in?" And she said, "No." And he said, "Well, why not?" And she came flying out from behind the counter. "I'll show you why not." Out the door he went. And my son, Rolf, who was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, he never forgot that.
And of course, now the cafe burned this
Yeah,
spring
that
with
was-
the other
It
two
was,
buildings.
It was a very old, historic type building with a stamped tin ceiling and all. And
Did you eat there?
I have, I don't know if I ate much when Jack, but other people ran the cafe too. And, the Jacksons owned it forever, but other people would run it and have a cafe there. And I didn't eat there much because some people, like my buddy Dick Gilbertson, I think he'd eat there every noon. He worked in town, and he'd go over to Jackson's, and Fred would cook him something, and he'd eat. I think he was a good cook. I didn't eat there much.
Did they have a dish that they were known for at all?
I don't really know.
Huh.
I don't know.
But when you speak of Dick Gilbertson, he was an old timer with you. He was a friend of Wayne. And
More Maple Hill people, and Gilbertson family, of course, was Maple Hill, and he and I were. He was a year older, but we were always good buddies, and so we did a lot of things together. A lot of hunting and fishing and tramping the woods and everything. He was one of my good friends.
he was a typesetter at the newspaper.
Yeah, he worked for the News Herald for, I don't know, 50, 60 years, a long time. He was there from the time he was very young until for a long time. Yeah, and he was on the Historical Society, and he was our proofreader. He was very good at it. He could go over something and he could pick out any mistake, just bang, like that. He was very good at it. That certainly I would miss, or many people would, but he didn't miss anything.
So mostly your family has been involved with logging.
Logging or lumbering.
Yeah. And so there's a number of characters there that I'm sure that you have come across.
Yes.
And to get the ball rolling, one that I would like to, we had started talking about Leslie Donnick after my last interview with you.
Yeah.
And Leslie Donnick is still a truck driver.
Yep.
But how old was he? His dad was a logger, right?
Yes. Yeah. And his mother was Everson family. Yeah, she was one of the Eversons. So yeah, I knew him I knew Les since he was a little kid. And I remember one instance where he was, I don't know how old he was, but maybe, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8. I don't know how old, but he wasn't very old. And anyhow, his dad was unloading a load of pulpwood on the landing with a floater, and Les was sitting in the truck playing with he had a little balsa wood glider airplane, and his dad hollered down to him, "Move the truck ahead." Okay, so he jumped in and put her in gear and revved it up and moved it ahead. And as far as he was supposed to. And then when he got out, I ran over my airplane. It just struck me funny at the time that the kid was so small that he's playing with a little airplane, but
He could drive the truck.
He could drive the truck.
Well, and he like drove skidder and
Oh yeah, he drove. One time it's before skidders as such were popular, and his dad Jerome had built one out of an old grader, a 4-wheel drive grader, and altered it so that it would go through the woods and had a winch on the back, and he would. In those days, they'd strip cut pulpwood. In other words, lumberjack would cut and make it little piles in the woods, and then somebody come with a cat or horses or a dray and load it on and haul it out. But he made this thing that they could just back up to these piles and put a winch line around it and winch it right up on the back of this skidder and take the whole bundle out and drop it. It was quite a improvement, mechanical improvement. And anyhow, we were thinking of maybe making one or something, so we went up to look at it, and Les was there running it all by himself. And I suppose maybe he was 14 years old or 13 or 14 years, just a kid. But it was going, we could hear him, there he came with the
and it was not the safest looking machine, as I recall.
Well, it certainly didn't have any modern safety devices on it. It was just as is grader, put together, but and shortened and turned around. The engine was in the other, and stuff. But it was. I was impressed that a young kid like that could be out there working alone. So,
Who else in logging was active at that time?
Well, your uncles,
my uncles were
Yeah.
loggers.
Carl.
And they logged mostly pine logs, big pine, but they were, I guess, a step ahead of most of the other loggers in the fact that they always used a skidding arch. In other words, it was a two-wheeled thing that you had to winch on the cat and you ran over, and you could hook onto the logs and winch them up, hold them up off the ground, and then pull them out that way. And they used that before skidders that were popular. Of course, that skidders, the arch part is self-contained, but they did that, and I don't know. We worked in the cold weather, always, never, it was never too cold to work, and we could always get the cat started because when I worked in the woods with them, because we always had a portable cat shed that we could, when we got to the job, we'd set it up and put the cat in there at night and bank up the snow around the door, and come in the morning, the cat would start. Away you go, no matter how cold it was. So,
Since I'm the newbie to the area, and you're still kind of in logging, right, Kent? Is that what you said?
he's a logger, yeah.
Maybe some of the changes that you've seen throughout the years in Cook County, because I've always known it to be this way, but obviously there must be changes in logging in this area.
Yeah.
What kind of some of the big ones that you see changed?
Well, of course, my uncles, I think, got the first chainsaw around here that I had ever seen, and it was a huge thing. Of course, a 2-man type, and weighed, I don't know, 115 pounds or something like that. But they used to use it to cut pine, but before that, everything was cut by hand, and all the pulpwood and all the logging was done by hand cutting, and a lot of the loggers used a bow saw, what they used to call it, Swede saw or Finn saw. It was a bow and a thin blade, and they cut pretty fast, especially on small wood, and that's what they used, and then they'd cut it to length in the woods, to pulpwood length, and then they'd stack it on strips, like we call it. They'd make a little skid road and then stack wood on both sides of that. And then they'd come with either horses or a cat, but in the earlier days, horses. When I went to school, it was very common sight to look out the window and see a truck going by with a team of horses up on the back. They heading for the woods. Mostly all the wood was skidded by horses at that time. Very few cats, and then later on cats, and then of course later on skidders. But still, all hand cut, and even up until I don't know what 20 years ago or so,
Yeah.
before they started using clippers or machines to cut the tree down. It was cut with the chainsaw otherwise, and then trimmed with a cane chainsaw and then skidded, And of course, after they quit strip cutting as such, that is bucking it in the woods and piling it, they'd just cut it, trim it out, and then come with a skidder and pull it out full length, and they'd buck it on landing like they still do, except they do it with more sophisticated machinery now. But the process was the same. But all the wood, like all the pulpwood, in the summertime was peeled, and so and then in winter, and at that time most of it was 4 foot, and it loaded by hand on trucks and then hauled down the hill and piles down by the harbor. And then in the spring, when the boats came, they'd water, they'd call it watering wood, and they'd load it again by hand on trucks and back up to the lake and dump it. And some trucks, I suppose, had hoists on them like a dump hoist, but most of them didn't. They were just a flatbed, and they had what they called trip stakes. It was stakes in the back that you could pull a lever and they'd drop, and so they'd back down to the water on quite a slope, and they had a big log there, and they'd back up. When the truck hit that log, it had to come with a little momentum, and then hit the trip at the same time. The load would fly off and go in the water, and so one of the stories that I didn't see it happen, but it's supposedly happened. One of the local characters, Alfred Brisson, still had relatives here, and he backed her down to that log, hit the log and hit the trip stake, but it didn't trip, and the truck went up in the air about 10 feet or so, and it finally tripped, and down he came with a pow. The front axle was bent out like this. And I didn't see it happen, but I'm sure it's true. And but when I was a kid, when they did load pulpwood, then they had a loader, steam-powered chain loader thing that would float out there, and they'd have wood in a raft, and they'd push it into that thing, and it'd go up. And they hauled it on in ships, not barges, but ships, and with holds. And we lived here on the hill, about 2 or 3 miles from town, and you could tell when they moved the loader and were dropping into a new hold, because we could hear it from here going boom, 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 boom. There were 6 hitting the bottom of the ship, And then they hired all kinds of extra help to straighten that wood out in the hold and get it straight.
Did you ever work in the
I never worked in
Your Uncle Chuck did.
My brother did. They'd hire everybody's high school kids, storekeepers, preachers, anybody that would work and they paid good money, so everybody wanted to work on the boat. The only requirement is you had to have a pair of spiked boots because the wood was extremely slippery. So if you had a pair of boots, you were hired, and you'd put in your shift. And I suppose you got probably 3 times the wages that anybody would get for any other kind of labor like that, because they want to turn those ships around fast and get them out of here. So everybody worked on the boats. A lot of people, a lot of local people, and other lumberjacks too would come in and work on the boat when they were loaded. But it was before my time. But I loaded barges when they later times when they'd well, I worked on both where they would raft when they was consolidated company would raft wood. They'd just dump it in the lake in a big raft and tow it to Ashland. And then the other, jackpine, and that was loaded onto big barges, old LSDs or such. And at first they'd just dump it in a big raft in the harbor, and they had a big basket crane, and they'd dump it on the deck, and then again they'd have people who would have to straighten it. But then when I worked on it, you'd put it on a truck, and they had what they called a squeeze box. It was, you drive in there and it would quickly make it even, so they could load really fast without being careful. You just throw the wood on, and then you go, and they'd had slings under there that the crane on the thing would pick up the whole thing and set it on the barge, and it was saved a lot of labor and pretty fast. And I did work on that. I used to run a crane, and then because they'd work. I wasn't working for that company, but I got hired as an extra because I could run a crane and a clam, and they'd run 10 or 12 hours, and one man couldn't do that for that long a time, so we'd switch. One guy'd run for either 5 or 6 hours, and then the other guy. Then you'd switch and drive truck the rest of the time, because it wasn't as hard, hard on your legs, very hard on your legs to run a crane all day, and you have to you play out. So I was young then too, but even then we had to switch off. So that was the way it went then.
So now, is this the time period where there would be the guy who, when the logs are all in the water, would have to be out on the logs pushing and?
Well, I never, other than kids running the boom logs, I never saw anybody out there running the boom. But when they bring the raft in and to this loader thing, there was a guy there, but he was on a kind of a float thing, and he'd make sure the wood was coming to go up that conveyor. And I suppose, like when they rafted, I don't know what happened when they got to Ashland, but I suppose they had some kind of a similar thing there that took it and put it back on rail cars and shipped it to Wisconsin Rapids. But we used to water for Consolidated, we'd water out of Sugarloaf and Grand Marais Harbor and Horseshoe Bay. They had a yard in all 3 places, and we'd raft from all those places. And they had their own tug. They'd tug pro booms to Ashland.
I'm just going to back up a little bit, back to the horses, of course, since I'm interested in horses. But logging with horses was a dangerous thing, because they would ice the logging trails for the horses to go on, and to make it easier to pull. But then when they'd have to go downhill, they'd have to throw hay into the ruts to slow the horses in the sleigh down, and sometimes the horses they couldn't keep up with it, and they get caught and die. So,
well, yeah, if the sleigh got away and,
Yeah.
and the horses got pushed, and they couldn't hold it. They'd try to get out of it. They'd try to, and of course they invariably get roll over and get their legs broken. When they were at the company that my dad worked for out by Redcliffe, out by east of town, I think he wasn't slave hauling, but he was skidding for that company. But I think they killed, I don't know, at least a dozen horses or something that winter coming down the hill. It was very, very dangerous. If the road monkey, the guy that threw the hay in the rut, if he had to be skilled, and the teamster would yell, how much to put in, because if they put too much, he'd get stuck, and then they couldn't move it again. They had hauled tremendous loads of horses, but they hauled them in ice ruts, so they slid easy. But so it was very critical, and the guys with the hay would run alongside the sleigh and throw hay in the rut according to what the teamster was hollering. But if they were wrong, then the thing would get away and start going. The guy throwing hay couldn't keep up, and the horses couldn't keep ahead of it. So they're dangerous.
And the hay thrower was called the road monkey?
Road monkey, yeah. Everybody that did a job was some kind of a monkey. Yeah.
Or a punk. Monkey or a punk.
When they built roads and did things, the dynamite man, the guy that did the blasting, he was a powder monkey. and there was up until not so long in my time, certainly, there was a guy that worked at the Midway garage. His name was Myron Peterson, but they called him Powder Monkey Peterson because he had been a dynamite man.
So he wasn't a grease monkey
for years, but he was still Powder Monkey Peterson.
How about the Larson brothers?
Well, the Larson brothers, of course, were very good, very high-powered loggers.
They called them the high power.
Yeah, they called them high-powered, and they used to say, like Hank and Evelyn Larson, still, she's a realtor in town, but her husband, they always said, he cuts like he's mad at the trees. He'd never straighten up from morning to night. He'd just keep cutting. But they were all good loggers, and they did very nice work. They put up a lot of wood, and I used to haul, load trucks with a crane and climb. It was always fun to haul their wood because their piles were just straight and beautiful. And they were the guys that did the most and the best work were the ones that made the money.
Most successful.
And the ones that couldn't do good work because they didn't get paid enough were the kind of guys that you didn't really like to haul for because their work wasn't very good. So these guys, they were very good, and they worked hard. So and they call them cough drop brothers. That was Smith brothers, and Larson's were half brothers, and so they called the whole outfit the Cough Drop Brothers because they were Smith brothers.
Oh, okay. Smith Brothers Cough Drops. Now, it was Hank Larson and
Hank and Roger, Lloyd, and Bernie, of course, never worked in the woods. No. He worked, I don't say never, but no. he didn't work with them in the woods. He worked at Midway for years, and those are the Larsons, and then the Smiths were Jewel, Stanley, Melvin. I guess that's all. And Jewel and then Jewel's son. Can't think of his name. Larry. Yeah, and they all work together. Often all work together on the same job. They were very good loggers. Yeah.
And I heard stories. I think it was about Roger. He was the muscle, as I recall. Like
Yeah.
I've heard stories of him like picking up 55-gallon drums of
Well,
oil and
I can't vouch for it, but it wouldn't surprise me. He was a powerful guy. Yeah.
I heard he lowered an engine in out of a skidder by strapping it around his some kind of a strap or chain or something around his waist and lowered it.
I wouldn't doubt that
Yeah.
either. He's a very powerful guy. And always with a smile on his face.
Yeah.
A very good natured guy. He was a year behind me in school, I think. And Hank was a year ahead of me. Yeah. Lloyd was a little older, maybe my brother's age, 5 years older.
so let's talk about some other female characters. Another one that I'll be interviewing is Eleanor Waha.
Certainly a character. And she's, of course, she's my cousin. Her mother and my grandmother were sisters, so she's just one generation ahead of me, but we were cousins. And
She was the statistic lady.
and
She knows,
yeah,
she knows
was and
everything.
is,
She
yeah.
knows everybody's birthday. She
You know,
knows everybody's anniversary. She knows everybody's everything.
anything if you want any kind of information. And of course, she was on the Historical Society for years and was a treasurer and kept track of everything. She was very good.
An accountant for many
Yeah,
organizations.
she was very, very good and accurate, and she'd come and it was up half the night because she was 4 cents off or something on something. She couldn't find it. Well, you're a banker, so you know about that. Nobody goes home until they find it, But anyhow, she was very good and still is. And if anybody wondered, do you know how I'd get somebody's telephone number? Yeah, call Eleanor. She has it in her head. She rattle it right off.
Would she have coffee with Mildred?
Oh, once in a while.
Once in a while, yeah.
Birthdays and
Yeah, oh yeah, she'd come for occasions.
she stopped, once in a while.
But she was always pretty busy.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
busy.
Yeah, she was
yeah,
always
very, very
heading
busy.
somewhere or going
Yeah.
to do something.
Yeah.
And she's, whatever organization she's was attached to, she is one that made the coffee and brought the lunch
Yeah.
and whatever, cleaned up, and she was in charge. In other words, of everything. Everything was done, and she did it.
Our Borealis Christmas concerts, our 80-piece choir and 25-piece orchestra. For years, Eleanor would always take over the copy and organizing that. And I'd go to her about, in October and ask her if she would do it. Oh yeah, it's all taken care of. Don't worry about a thing. You can just forget it. I've got it under control, and I'm like, okay. Every year I didn't really have to ask her.
Oh.
She would have been there and it would have been served.
And there's somebody commented, we still at the Historical Society call Eleanor for any sort of tips or do you remember who was related to so-and-so way back when? And
She would know. Yeah. She would know.
Yeah, she's still, how old is she in relation to you?
She's my sister's age, which is what, 90?
Well, 96, I think.
95 or 96.
She still has a schedule and errands and things she does, and she doesn't drive anymore. So her brother Chet has to drive her around. So he's been way more active than he planned on being in retirement with having to do keep up with all her duties around town.
Yeah, she into everything, and sure she got slowed down a little. She fell or something, and So after that, she used a walker to get around, but she usually carries the walker.
Carries it.
She carries the walker.
Here she goes
Doesn't
to-
use it for
Carries the
walking.
walker.
She carries it. Yeah. So it's just a little extra load. That's all.
I know somebody who pulls a walker once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm supposed to ask about Oler Snevitz.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about him?
I don't know. Peter Borson just said, ask about Oler Snevitz and Jimmy Spoon.
well,
I don't, I'm the wrong guy to ask about both of them, I guess, although I knew Oler. And he, he lived up the trail and very much a character. And
Didn't he have a place out of Pike Lake?
he had a place on Pike Lake, and he had, he lived in a little cabin, and then he built all kinds of little buildings, but they were, just a little bit bigger than a doghouse. And he had stuff stored in it, but he never built a building big enough to put much in. There was all these little buildings all over the place. I don't know if he only had short lumber or what it was why he only built a small building. But
and didn't he change his name and spell
well,
it
that's the
backwards?
story. That's the story. And
Stevens.
I'm very skeptical about that.
It
The story goes that his name was actually Rollo Stevens, but he spelled it backwards because he was trying to hide from his ex-wife or something. I mean, but everybody knew the story. Now, if you were trying to hide from somebody, why would you tell everybody the story? But anyhow, that's the story. And there are other people who know a lot more about him than I did. And as far as Jimmy Spoon, I didn't really know him. I knew the name, and I remember his brother, Tommy Spoon, and he sort of mysteriously died young in town. Found him in the street, and nobody seemed to know why. And in those days, they must have died, or like an old guy that used to be the coroner here. Well, either died or froze to death, so we won't have any inquest. So, but anyhow, I don't know much about the Spoons.
How about E.J. Croft?
Oh,
I knew EJ. Everybody probably knows more than I do. He was when I was young, he was a boat builder, and we planed a lot of boat lumber for him to build. He built Lake Superior, skiffs and gas boats and all that type of thing. He's very good. He's a very good boat builder. Later on, he worked in the woods with some. I don't remember what loggers, and then of course his biggest claim to fame was his piano playing, and he could play the piano with chopper mitts on, leather chopper mitts.
Very well.
Well,
it sort of made sense.
The wags would say you couldn't tell much difference when he played with him or without him. But he could play, the beer barrel polka with the chopper mitts on, and you knew what he was playing. There's no question about it. His story about this was that this is, as I've heard it, I can't verify this, but that's what I've heard, is that when he was a kid, they had a piano, and they lived down on the shore, and they had a piano, but they didn't have room for it in the house, so they had to have it out on the porch. So the only way he could play was with his chopper mitts on. So that's the story.
That's how he
True or not, I don't know.
knew how to play.
But he could. I've heard him play with the chopper mitts on. He used to do that on, Fisherman's Bay. Anytime he was sort of a showman. He's pretty good at that. And he could, he could rattle.
Yeah.
He could tickle the piano pretty good I suppose he'd probably had no training at all, just played by ear, you know. But,
Just incredible how innovative and also how those skills get developed in people of
yeah.
I've never heard so many people playing by ear. Like in nowadays kids, there's maybe a couple I know that play by ear and have that gift and
No, it is a very common thing that people play by ear. Yeah. Kent still does it. He can, if you whistle him a tune, he can play it.
Good thing my lips are dry right now, so I can't whistle you a tune.
I'm instrumentless.
That can be amended. Next time we'll get Kent playing. Do you have anybody else that you can think of?
Well, there were certainly a lot of characters, and you know, I've given some interviews before about the Bally family. The whole family were characters, you know. The Uncle Bill, I never knew, of course, Sam Bally, the guy that built the original blacksmith shop, but because he died 10 years before I was born. But I knew his sons, Uncle Bill and Albert, and then his daughter Blanche, and they were, all of them were very much characters, especially Al and Bill, and then Bill Jr., or he wasn't Bill Jr., he was young Bill, they called him, you know, Albert's boy. And I spent a lot of time in the blacksmith shop, and I can tell you one story about we're gonna have a cat in the
She's got to have her moment too.
One time, I don't remember just what year, but it was when snowmobiles were quite new, and we didn't have one. None of us had one. Bill nor I, and we had a friend by the name of Mildred Peterson. His son Harry lives up on Devil's Track here, but we were buddies, and we'd fish a lot. And we wanted to go fishing in the spring on the spring ice, after the ice floats, and it's you know, it's good going then, but open water, of course, between there and the ice. And so anyhow, we decided we'd build a vehicle that we could go down. We wanted to fish. There were some brook trout lakes up by Pine Lake, and we wanted to go there. So we built, in the evening, we built a little thing with some car wheels on the back and some other wheels and a tiller that you could steer, and we put it up on a plank, and a little engine and a lever to tighten the belt and such. And we called it, I didn't name it, but Smiley named it, or Bill named it the Onyx, because it was skidoo spelled backwards. Here comes a cat. And anyhow, it was called the Onyx. And so we hauled it up to McFarland Lake, loaded it in the boat, hauled it out onto the ice. Well, first of all, we got the thing going at sometime late we built it in about an evening or two. And we were running down Broadway with it in, I don't know, late at night, 10, 11 o'clock at night, going up and down the street, laughing like hyenas, because it was fun. Anyhow, nobody even looked, you know, people were walking, never even saw, here we go, nobody paid a bit of attention. Anyhow, we hauled it up then to McFarland, and loaded them in the boat, hauled it out onto the ice, and then we tied the boat on behind. And in the meantime, Willie Williams, another local guy, had come along, and he wanted to go with. He wasn't in on building it, but he wanted to go with. So okay, so he rode in the boat, and the rest of us sat on the plank and down the lake we went. But got down to the end of the McFarland and loaded back in the boat, back out onto Pine, back onto the ice. Away we went down there, and as it happened, when we were going down Pine Lake, a deer came bounding across the ice, and he got fairly close, and he stopped, and he looked at us, and he looked us, and he watched us go by, and he never moved. He just stood there. And Bill said, "I don't think he's ever seen an oryx before." So anyhow, we went to these lakes. It just so happened that the fish were biting like crazy. I think we filled out on nice big brook trout, and probably the best fishing I've ever had in my life. And came back, same performance, back onto the ice, back into the boat, back onto and when we got done, we got home, we dismantled it, and that was the end of the oryx. But I always recall it that Willie Williamson said, he said you can count the really fun days on your hands that you have in your life, or maybe one hand even, but for him that had to be one of them. It was that kind of a day. I never forgot. Not only did we have fun with this machine, but we caught just tremendous fishing that day. Yeah. So,
Well, we're coming up on about an hour here.
that sounds good.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody's tired of listening to me.
So I'm gonna pull a little privilege here, and we'll end with for my children, some of their family history. Their grandmother, Gertrude Erickson, was in your class. She was 4'7" nothing.
Yep.
Just a tiny little woman.
Yep.
And she was a Spitfire.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and my husband is Brent Erickson, her son, and he also is a Spitfire. And Gertrude's husband, Warren, or Bill Erickson, was very quiet.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So tell me some stories or a story of Gert when she was younger, or Gert and Skinner interacting, or just to have it on record for.
I have a few.
Okay.
Well, Gert and I, we'd have coffee together once in a while because our children were the same age. And I go over to her house, and invariably, every time I go there, a new wall had been torn down, and she had done it, and she was remodeling. And she and Brent were usually screaming at each other. and Kent told him a story that Brent did, but I'll let him tell it. But I remember one time with Gert, our kids were young, and we drove to Duluth in the wintertime. And they went to a TV show called Mr. Toot. And Brent will love this. Well, Mr. Toot was on 5 days a week, and it was a show for kids, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the kids would always watch it. And so we all went, and then they choose a Super Toot. And the Super Toot gets to sit with Mr. Toot and be the Super Toot. Well, guess who got chosen as the Super Toot? Brent Erickson. So I don't know if he was proud or embarrassed, but anyway, that afternoon, when we started home, it started to snow.
Yeah, but you missed part of it.
Yeah, you missed part
of the best part of the
Oh,
story.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. Well, you better tell that part then.
Well,
Go ahead.
I wasn't there, obviously, but the story goes that when you're the Super Toot, you get to choose a toy out of the toy, out of Mr. Toot's toy box. And of course, Brent looked in the toy box and Nothing there I want. Which, if you know Brent, that'd be pretty typical.
Well, I guess I was overlooking that and I was heading home because the home trip was kind of interesting. We were driving in a snowstorm and it was blinding snow and we had all these kids in the back who had just, hyped up at Mr. Toot. And Gert was getting an asthmatic attack. And so anyway, we had to stop at Schroeder to brush the snow off the front and the back windows. And Gert was sitting in the back seat. And so I jumped in the front seat and started taking off. And all of a sudden I heard, "Hey, I'm not in the car yet. Well, don't leave me." Here's Gert. And so oh my gosh, I thought she was in the car. Well, then by that time, when we got home, she needed some epinephrine. And so she asked me if I would give her a shot. And I thought she said 1 cc. And so I pumped it into her and she said, "How much did you give me?" And I said, "1 cc. Oh, I only wanted a half." And she flew out of the house and Bill took her home. I don't know what the rest of the evening was like. So it was quite a trip. But Gert was, and I love Gert, and I maybe shouldn't even say this, but she was kind of like in the Wizard of Oz, kind of the Wicked Witch of the West, or whichever one it was. She was just like that, just
Oh, yeah, just always flying around and
Yeah.
something to say.
Yeah,
And
but funny and a good lady. Good lady.
so the story of Brent and
Well, and that's of course my brother Mark's story.
Yeah,
Again, I wasn't there. I was before my time, but Mark told me the story.
Yeah, he just told it.
And because he was over with Brent and they were out in the woods next to the house. And this, of course, something had happened that brought it up to this point in the day or whatever anyway. And so Brent was in the woods whittling on a stick and my brother, and he had some string. Oh no, he was whittling on a stick and he asked my brother to go to the house and get some string. And Mark said, "Why?" And Brent said, "Because I'm going to make a bow and arrow and kill my mom with it."
and he was what, like
Maybe
6 or
6
7?
years old. They were pretty young. Mark said they were pretty young. So.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Love you, honey. You're watching.
Sorry, Brent.
Well, thank you again so much for sharing these stories with us, and we're going to be back again sometime just to cause you some more stress thinking over these things. So just a reminder, everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. Remember
to become a member in September.
There you go.
We got lots of rhyming words there.
Yeah, we're looking for all the support we can get. Like, share, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and we will add more stories as the month goes on. I have a long list of other people to talk to, and I'm going to need to talk to them more than once, or we are. And so I think it's going to go on beyond September, Tuesdays at 7. So reach out to us if you have any suggestions, but otherwise, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we'll see you again soon. Next Tuesday at 7 is the Rydens family. Mm-hmm. All right. Bye.